Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you're all having a good day. We're back here at the Dripstone Cave. I've just finished a little bit of an AFK session over at the ink farm. Even though I spent a bunch of the ink on some dark prismarine, we're getting a decent amount now in return, so I'm quite happy with that. We'll probably do a more efficient ink farm or a more efficient black dye farm in future, but as far as ink goes, I think that's all we need for the moment, and this can also be traded with librarians if we wanted to grab a few extra emeralds from that, so another reason ink is good to have around. Today we're going to be spending some time here in the Dripstone Cave where I've decided it's time to finally start terraforming this place a little bit. We've done a bit of work around the natural features of the landscape so far, and I think it's probably time to start leaving our mark on this place in a bigger way. And so one of the things I'm going to do, much as I feel like I'll regret this in the short term, is start to remove a lot of the dripstone features in this area, especially the ones coming up from the floor. The stalagmites around here are kind of getting in the way of me building anything because I feel like I have to weave around them instead of just taking them out and adding them back in later. If we hop on down here, I've started to lay out a few pathways and bits and pieces in previous episodes. We've got a big central crane here that's supposed to be bringing all of the copper ore back from the depths up to that loading platform there, and around the outside here, obviously, we've been building stuff that's floating up here. But I want to start doing some stuff around the floors of the cave and into the cave walls as well. So we're going to be starting to maybe shape some of the dripstone features around here into things that we control exactly where they go instead of relying on natural generation to make things look pretty. I've started to do that over here already because this section here was not a formation of dripstone that existed before. I just decided to put it in there as kind of like a natural barrier here in the path, and that's probably what I will end up doing with the remainder of the dripstone on the floor of this cave. We might leave some of the larger formations and pillars alone, especially the ones that we've already converted to our own purposes, or we're hiding redstone contraptions underneath and that kind of thing. But for the most part, I think we need to get rid of all of these spikes, and that will give us a better view of what we're doing here exactly. I'm also going to do the same on some of the upper levels around here, and here is where I might start actually removing some of the smaller dripstone spikes, unless we're already using them for something else, because it's kind of nice to have a flatter area up here that we can use for aesthetic builds, and have it kind of be an area that it looks like the people who are running this mine are storing machinery, materials, all of that kind of stuff that they would need to make this operation happen. And then down here, especially where the areas of dripstone like this are crowded around, I want to start maybe putting some mining tunnels in here. And obviously this is going to be a lot easier given that we have a beacon nice and close by. But I've been playing a couple of other games, Elden Ring in particular, where there are like mines and stuff hidden around the landscape, and they're always beamed and propped and lit with lanterns, and everything feels a little bit more claustrophobic in a sense, and there could be some rare raw materials dotted around the caves around here that the miners here are digging for. So I think it'd be kind of a cool idea to start setting up features like that and getting rid of some of the natural features which, while they look pretty cool having generated this way, are potentially getting in the way of us doing anything more creative with this place. So this is going to be a more of a buildy episode, but if anything, I want the lesson here to be not to be afraid to mess with the natural landscape. Even if it looks fantastic, even if it looks super cool, chances are you can do something cooler with it. And given that none of the natural resources we're working with here are going to be destroyed in the process of gathering them, you could put them back if you wanted to, and the idea is that we're going to reuse a lot of these resources in adding dripstone features into the cave after we have placed some stuff that we actually want to be a landmark, a centerpiece, some sort of feature here in the cave. Of course, in the process of this, we are going to be uncovering some useful resources, so we can gather a bunch of the coal from around here. We'll probably get a fair amount of copper ore that we can take down to start smelting further down in the system, and honestly, I think it's going to be nice to do a little bit of digging around here, collect some resources, and see what we can come up with aesthetically. So we'll set out three major tasks for us in this video. We want to create some sort of mine here, some sort of mine shaft that's going to dig further into the natural rock of the cave. We're going to clear out that top level there to make room for an area where it looks like the miners are storing some stuff, and we're going to clear the cave floor of a lot of these natural pointed dripstone formations so that we can have a better look at the space we're working with and the stuff that we can fit in here. This first phase is mostly going to just be removing stuff, so I don't think it's something I need to show you folks all of on camera. We're going to cut away, and when we come back, we'll talk about the decision-making process of terraforming an area like this and the kind of builds we might want to do here. Well, after all that work, this place is looking very different, and I didn't announce the time-lapse this time because I just thought as soon as I got started, hey, how about I record some of this and show you at least the time-lapse. It's always really satisfying taking down large areas of terrain like this. And as you can see, I have already done some light terraforming over here, adding in slabs next to our little scaffolding ladder here so that we can easily make it up to this next plateau, where I think is probably going to be the majority of the material storage part of the cave. We can still remove some of these areas if we want to. Of course, all of this is ready to be reshaped if we need it to be, and there's still a few formations of dripstone that I left alone because it is nice to have a couple of them out of the way in areas where I don't think I'll really need them. But I think it's going to be nice to set up a few things around here, and one of the other side effects of this process is that I've been eliminating all of the water sources and stuff around here because those are a little bit irritating. They're just kind of puddles supposed to have been formed by the drip of all of the Dripstone Cave stalactites, and honestly I think it's better to not have them around just so it makes it easier for us to navigate here. Down here behind the heavy machinery, we've also cleared out a nice wide area so that we can make some paths through here, maybe head to some different mine shafts like the one that we're digging over there. I will finally get around to completing the back half of this crane, although the section underneath doesn't really need a whole lot going on with it. And finally over here we have our first mine shaft. I've made this one a lot larger than the abandoned mine shafts that you find in-game. This is starting at a 5x5 and we'll probably expand it a little as we go because we want a little bit of room around the sides so that the beams and props can actually stand out some. We're not going 2 fences and 3 planks over the top. We're probably going to do this with logs because honestly they seem like the most appropriate material for something that needs to be supported by a nice sturdy hunk of wood. And of course in the meantime we've gathered up a ton of dripstone and pointed dripstone, some of which I could convert into blocks if I wanted to store it a little bit more compact, but you can't break it back down into pointed dripstone once that's been done. And even though we have a farm for it down here, we've had this dripstone farm which I haven't really harvested, so it's kind of just there as a demonstration. We could probably deal with keeping hold of a bunch of the pointed dripstone if we want it for utility purposes or a little bit more redecoration as we start to reshape this dripstone cave and terraform it to our liking. So where are we going to start with all of this? Well, I'm pretty sure we want to keep the shape of the cave as we have it right now, and I want to add in a few more features like this one. I kind of freestyled this a little while ago, but I like the idea of lamps hanging from ropes like this. Obviously, the fence here is meant to be rope, and it's just meant to be draped over the natural formations of the cave, dangling lanterns down and making it feel like a lot of the light is reaching the cave floor. Obviously, the cave floor itself is mostly lit by torches because even with the revised mob spawning rules of mobs needing complete darkness to spawn, these lanterns aren't really doing a whole lot hanging from up there. But in terms of selling the idea that this area is being lit from above by lanterns, those will go a great deal of the way towards helping. And there's actually a natural gap here that leads straight to the surface that provides skylights during the day sometimes. So there may be some areas that are naturally a little bit better lit down here on the cave floor, even without some torches. But of course, that's only going to be practical during the day. I'm considering expanding the bridge out this way and having it meet up with this rock formation here, just so that we can have another means by which some of the heavier stuff is being brought up here for storage. But I think it makes a lot of sense for them to have a lot of the logs and stuff up here, maybe have some heavy machinery to get it down to the cave floor. I think this crane isn't quite going to be realistic for doing that, but I like the idea of them having a couple of ways of getting the logs further down, because of course all they need to do is allow gravity to do a bit of the work for them, and the logs could end up falling down there nice and easily, whereas it's harder to heave everything up to this level if it's all being generated down there at the cave floor. But I don't have a huge amount of wood over here right now because I spent so much of it making these bridges, so I think we'll head back to spawn, we'll grab a bunch of the logs that I've been farming, and let's see if we can make a start on these details I want for our Dripstone Cave base. So I brought a few bits and pieces over from the storage we have at spawn, and I think it'd be a good idea to set up a couple of nice straightforward log piles over here. This is something players do quite frequently to make it look like there are large piles of wood around. All you need to do is leave a couple of logs lying lengthways like so, and if we end up piling logs on top of these, it's easy to make sure you don't waste too much wood because you can make the center just hollow like this. Of course, it'll add a certain amount of realism if you leave the logs all slightly different lengths, and you can vary the wood type a little bit to make sure that the wood pile doesn't look too homogeneous so that it's comprised of all of these different types of logs. I feel like that works out for this area because they might just be bringing whatever wood they can find, basically, just to make sure that they can beam and prop all of the mine shafts in this place. And then around the outside, we can add some rails going over the top like so to make it look like this pile is strapped down. Perhaps it's even been done like that so that it can be lifted up here nice and easily by a crane. If the wood is all bundled together, that sort of makes sense. If we can spare some of the logs to turn them into sticks, we can even add a couple of ladders into the mix here, which will make it look like it actually wraps around the side of this a little bit more. Suspend your disbelief a little bit because the straps change color, but of course the ladders can line up with the rails nice and easily, and that will make it look like the whole thing is bundled together nice and tight. We might even want to add a couple of fences here, as though there is some kind of fastening that's been clamped to the central log as they're all pulled up, and that's just disconnected from the crane that's moving some of this stuff around. I like the idea of leaving behind these components where it looks like something is in the midst of being processed. Kind of feels like we can add some life to the cave that way. I think these two dripstone pillars being roughly opposite each other seem like a good candidate for stringing up some of our lanterns and lights, so we're going to have a rope sort of dangling between them, so the lanterns aren't quite going to be touching the cave roof, although it might be attached to the cave roof in a couple of places just to make it look like there is something supporting it. We're going to step back a couple of times and eyeball it just to make sure that this is going in the right direction, but yeah, I like the way that it's going so far. Let's see if we can get that connected to the ceiling there. Yeah, I like that. That's an excellent start, and somehow a fence has ended up on top of the lantern. Let me just go and retrieve that. Amazing that the hitbox of a lantern is just slightly larger than the hitbox of a fence, so stuff can get stuck on there. You can even stand on there if you want to. But I like the idea of these fences kind of being attached to a pulley system of sorts here, as though the rope feeds through a couple of these wheels that are being represented here by the grindstones. And yeah, we need to orient that upwards facing, which means we should probably put a block there, and that's looking pretty good. We can even have a dangling piece of fence out the bottom there as though it's holding onto the last bit of rope and has been cinched off at the edge there. I really wish we could attach levers to the side of grindstones, but I just tried a couple of times. Unfortunately, we cannot. Anyway, I like the idea that there's a mechanism here that can give this line a little bit of slack so that if a bulb goes out in one of the lanterns, maybe you could just winch the whole thing down and repair it, replace it. If these weren't electrical lights, then they could probably use some fuel or something like that as well. So it makes sense that there's a mechanism by which you can take them all down again. And if you want to add a bit of detail here, then some of the villager workstations like the grindstone can be a pretty good place to start. I think I'm probably going to set up a kind of sawmill operation over here somewhere, maybe just behind this, as though they're processing the logs as soon as they arrive here. If we set up one of the stone cutters on top of a piece of scaffolding here, it can look like a supported, elevated saw blade. And then we can set up another set of grindstones with logs over the top, as though these are rollers feeding the logs in towards the stone cutter's saw blade. And we could maybe even have a plank or a slab attached to the front of that, as though the whole thing is being cut up as it goes through the saw blade. We can splash a couple of planks and slabs around here, some buttons, as though those are offcuts from the production process, and I like the idea of having composters around here, maybe with a little bit of compost filling up the bottom of them. I don't have anything organic on me right now, but I like the idea of these being basically like sawdust bins, effectively, so that you could sweep some of the stuff off the floor and throw it all in here, ready to either be mulched down for actual compost or potentially just reused elsewhere. Then up here, as though they're being slung on a different pile, we can put some of the slabs and planks of the different wood types, maybe have them overlapping a little bit like that, and this can make it look like there are a bunch of wood planks ready to go for elsewhere in the mines. And if we want to give the impression that some of these are being smoothed out a little bit, maybe we'll leave the lever there, and that could be maybe like a wood plane or something like that to carve off some of the rough edges. As plank piles go, I'd say that's pretty convincing. It's got a couple of balance issues here and there maybe, but hey, it's Minecraft, we don't need to worry too much about that. We could even stick a scaffolding underneath there if it feels like it needs to be supported. And so with just a few small changes, this area starts to feel a little bit more industrial. There's tons more detail we can pack in here, but I think it's time to move on to the mine shaft a little further down. So I haven't gone very far with this yet, but my idea for this mine shaft is that it branches off in a few different directions in a more organic fashion. We don't want this to be as organized as an in-game abandoned mine shaft, because mimicking that style doesn't seem like the most creative thing we can do. Instead, kind of inspired, like I said, by the environments of Elden Ring, I want to have a couple of beams and props just kind of shoring up the walls and ceiling of this area, and then each of these shafts is going to head off in a slightly different direction. We want to change ever so slightly, a few blocks at a time. We want to change the elevation and the angle of the mine shaft so that it curves away a little bit more from the entrance and you get blocked sight lines for some of the stuff that you might find in here if you come in and explore. So we're going to start off with the beams and props. Of course, these are just going to be standard spruce log affairs, but a couple of them we will want to be diagonal, just for a bit more of a dynamic feel. So I think we're going to put one here in place of this stone section. Of course, we can probably shore up the stone against it later. And we're going to leave a 1-block gap by the ceiling up there so that we can do a little bit more with slabs and make it look like the ceiling is touching in some places, but a wooden log is never going to fit exactly to a more organic cave ceiling, so it's going to obviously be a bit of an approximation. Now, for this to be on a diagonal, I think we want a 3-block wide section here, and for it to come down about here on the opposite side. And then to hide the ends of the logs here, we're going to actually attach some dark oak stairs, and I find dark oak blends better with the spruce log than spruce planks do, so I kind of like the idea of this texture filling in a bit of that material. Of course, if we want to add a little bit more detail, what better than spruce trapdoors? I think we'll put a couple of those around the outside here. We don't need one there because that stone block is there, and then we'll put some here as well. And as for where we put the lantern, I think we're going to put it on the inside log there, just so it kind of leads you down into the cave a little way. I think that works out pretty well. I like the style of this, and I think we can probably throw a couple of extra slabs of stone up in there to make it look like the cave roof is a little more organic. Those don't just have to be a regular stone either. We can also throw some cobblestone up here, and I think it will be kind of cool to have some more cobblestone around the outside, because this will of course be a little bit jagged and broken up thanks to the mining efforts that have taken place down here. So a mix of stone, andesite, and cobble around the outside here, and I think we'll do a few more of these as we go down the mineshaft. But one of the other things I want to introduce here is a different type of material. The majority of this around here is mostly stone. We got a couple of ores and probably a few stone variants the more we keep digging, but I want to introduce something that the miners have found that's a bit of a surprise. We've been mining for copper in here, that's the loose idea, and we could probably put a bit of the raw copper around here as well. Just have it outlined with stone to make it look like it's kind of been naturally found there. But I also want to make use of some of the prismarine that we're now getting from the Guardian farm, and I like the idea of introducing prismarine as a second type of material that the miners have found down here, and introduce it as a contrast of sorts to all of the copper that we'd expect to find. It could be fully oxidized copper because they share a similar kind of color palette, but since prismarine changes color a little bit over time, it's going to look a bit different every time we see it, and I like the idea of that being almost like a magical material down here. Maybe the miners have found something that they truly didn't expect, and they are still trying to figure out what powers it has as they dig it out of the ground. We can make it feel a little bit more crystalline by introducing some stairs into the equation here. We could probably throw a couple more jagged edges at it, and then we'll build up some cobblestone and stone slabs around the outside here, making it look like this thing has been carved out of the rock recently. Concealing a torch back there also might give it a kind of ethereal glow. We could make that a little bit more subtle with glow lichen or something like that. We could introduce some scaffolding here as tables if we wanted to light this up a little bit more fully, have a lantern on there to make it look like the miner has put their lantern down so that they can spend a bit of time digging out this cluster of prismarine in the walls, and we'll work on a little bit more terraforming around here just to make sure the cave feels nice and organic, because these things can look a little bit flat and boring otherwise. We got plenty of vines from the nearby jungle, so maybe we can introduce some mossy cobblestone, and that might blend between the prismarine and the cobblestone around it quite nicely. There we go, that's certainly added a bit more detail and a little more character to the place, so I'm going to spend a bit more time doing this off camera. We're going to do a couple more extensions of the mineshaft down here, and when we come back, we'll see how we're getting on. Hey folks, welcome back. So what we have down here, aside from a couple of mobs that I should probably take care of and make sure that this area is better lit up, is the new mineshaft design that I've been working on, and I think it's coming together very, very well. I would like to extend it a little bit further, but I have kind of gone to town on the details, the decorations, and the stone types inside of here, and the creepers are not helping. Or maybe he's just providing some design tips and letting me know that that dripstone didn't need to be there. Anyway, having put it back, I can show you that we got a few minecarts around the entrance here. I just threw a couple of rails down with some loose minecarts on them. We could maybe connect those up to something in future, but for now I like the idea that they're just here as a kind of way station that we can throw loose items into, and trust me, my inventory is a mess right now, so I'm pretty sure I'll just throw a bunch of stuff in here here and collect it later. As we move on in here, though, you'll notice that I have kind of gone to town with all of the different stone types. We've got some dripstone as we come in through here, and that's kind of a transitional material from the cave through to the mineshaft here. But as we delve deeper into the earth, I figured all of the dripstone and stuff was going to disappear because we are more going into the solid rock, and that's not a place where a lot of the, over time, a lot of the sediment wouldn't have had time to build up if the people have dug this shaft themselves. So instead, we've got materials like tuff, andesite, cobblestone, and even mossy cobblestone here and there. I like the idea of the mossy cobblestone being part of the moist environment around here, and maybe the moss starts to build up faster than the dripstone does. We've got a little bit of copper in the walls here, and I've thrown some big blocks of raw copper in there, just so that we could hide them and section them off a little bit with some of the stairs, and it looks a little bit more exciting than just copper ore blocks, because we're used to the copper ore blocks generating in the world, but these raw copper blocks usually signify that there's a huge vein of ore, so I kind of like the idea of them thinking they've tapped into something big. Beyond our first beams and props, of course, we have the little prismarine alcove that I decided to swap the lantern out for candles, even though I know candles aren't exactly the best thing to have in a mining scenario where pockets of trapped gas could lead to explosions. Not really the case in Minecraft. And I decided, with a little bit of prompting from my stream chat, that we should probably put some campfires in here extinguished to make it look like there are small piles of logs around. I made one brief change to our beams here, which was to add some barrels at the base of them, and once again that provides a neat concealed storage thing while making it look like these are sort of reinforced and maybe even like strapped to the stone on either side for a little bit of added support. Then further in, we've got another minecart right there, and I started to think about playing around with sight lines a little bit. So obviously, like, as you're standing back here and walking down here, you just think, oh, okay, the tunnel curves around to the left. But as you reach this point here, and the path here made out of cobblestone is kind of guiding you around to the left in that direction, this alcove becomes noticeable on the right-hand side. And it's the kind of thing that you might miss entirely if you were focused on which direction you were going and being led that way by the path and the light and the bend of the tunnel, but it rewards you for looking around a little bit by turning to the right and seeing that you can spot an alcove down here, which is probably going to contain another one of those prismarine clusters, basically like the mystical mineral that the mining company, the dwarven miners or whatever they are, has found here. And I like the idea of designing stuff like this. It sort of bleeds over into the world of environment design in other video games, where developers will often reward players for going off the beaten path. They will mark out the critical path through a level, through an area, whatever it happens to be, just so you can get to the objective as fast as possible. But for people who like exploring, they want to leave little rewards around every corner, and so we end up with areas like that which you can't really see from any angle other than standing right here. But we could potentially put in some stuff that if we darken the rest of this, if we take out like the lantern and the torch here, and we put a torch inside there, suddenly as you're coming down this tunnel you see a glow coming from the right instead of from around to the left, and you think, oh, your attention is suddenly drawn to this side now. And so it's interesting to see what cues we can put into an environment like this, and maybe consider it more like a game design experience, the kind of thing that we could use to guide players around an area if this was a custom-built dungeon for them, for example, or if it was, something to guide players around your base but misdirect them so that they end up going where you want them to go instead of exploring off the beaten path and finding storage rooms and hidden secrets that you've stashed around the place. I don't know, there's a bit of psychology involved in it, and I kind of like that angle. I think it could be a really neat way of doing stuff like this in future, and if nothing else, it's a good exercise in what you can build and how you can keep yourself surprised about the stuff that you find around every turn in your own base, especially in a single-player world like this where you're not really constructing the experience for anybody except yourself. Now, I've got a few more little bits and pieces of detail around here. I like the glow lichen a lot. Obviously, that's providing some light to the areas that need it, but also makes for a really good transition between different types of material. It becomes the common ground that you can overlay over the top of two different blocks, and suddenly those two blocks have something in common, where without that, if you just take the stone and the raw copper blocks, they look nothing alike. So obviously, having glow lichen as a material to bridge the gap between two different types of blocks like that actually works pretty well. And I do love the details of having things like candles in here. Any kind of sub-block detail, you can get anything that's not a full square meter of material, is always worth having. And I think I need other bits and pieces of that here and there. Tried to do a little bit of that with buttons, because buttons are always good for looking like, you know, loose rocks on the ground and that kind of stuff. But after a while, they start to look a little bit too samey. You can rotate them, but you can't really do much else with them, so they can't be at an angle or anything like that. So I'm looking for other stuff that I can potentially do that with. If we get a hold of a couple of charged creepers and got some skeleton heads, we can maybe have those facing the wall as though they were rocks that you could put on an angle, because the heads can be rotated depending on which direction you're facing when you place them. Honestly, there's a lot we can do here, but we're packing detail in, and that's some of the coolest stuff that we can do in a build like this. If it's going to feel a little bit claustrophobic, even in this mineshaft where it's still relatively open, you want to make sure that there is detail all around the player, either so they feel like there's a lot going on around them as they travel through here, or potentially so they have landmarks to guide them. If we end up with stuff like mossy cobblestone lining the path down here, then at least they know that that is the way the path leads. And hopefully you've learned a little bit from some of this, because I've been learning as I go, and I'm actually kind of into this whole angle of treating this as a game design experience now, so maybe we'll find some other ways to do that in future videos. For now though, that's where we're going to leave this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide. Thank you so much for watching. My name has been Pixlriffs. Don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you folks soon. Take care. Bye for now.